Hi, Gary DeWall here. Good morning. And this is another Bridging the Week, June 17th to 21st, and today is June 24th, 2013. As I mentioned last week, I was part of a contingent of FIA directors and advisors that met in Washington, D.C. this week with some CFTC commissioners and senior staff, the Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions at the Department of Treasury, and a congressman and senator too. We also heard from Ambassador Valle de Almeida, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United States. Did I learn anything new? Not really, but I walked away with a couple of headlines. First, the most immediate issue is what happens on July 12th when the CFTC cross-border exemptive order expires. If nothing happens, as this seems more and more likely, non-U.S. dealers may be reluctant to engage in swap transactions with anyone that might even remotely qualify as a U.S. person for fear of exceeding the $8 billion U.S. person threshold and requiring them to register with the CFTC as a swap dealer and complying with a number of CFTC rules. Moreover, non-U.S. registered swap dealers and branches and guaranteed affiliates of U.S. swap dealers would have to apply all CFTC transaction rules when trading with U.S. persons and guess how substituted compliance might work in connection with entity-level rules, let alone how offshore entities will be able to demonstrate comparability on a rule-by-rule basis in order to qualify to apply such entity-level rules in the first place. Chairman Gensler and senior European officials in Montreal met this week and supposedly discussed this matter, but I have not seen any reports yet regarding the outcome of these talks. Let's hope that some reasonableness prevailed. Moreover, and second, it is clear that retaliation is already afoot because of the CFTC's hardline position. Many are fearful that ESMA will determine that U.S. clearinghouses are not as tough as the European counterparts are required under EMIR, the European equivalent of Title VII of Dodd-Frank, and thus will not be deemed so-called qualified central counterparties. This will cause very severe capital requirements for EU banks that are clearing members of such U.S. entities, even if they are clearing members through their U.S. subsidiaries or affiliate. Third, CFTC's proposal that FCM set aside a sufficient amount of their own funds 24/7 to cover customer deficits will impose significant costs on them and more likely their customers. Moreover, if customers are required to pre-fund their potential collateral requirements as well as potential losses in advance of each day's activity, which is very likely since most FCMs do not have the necessary liquidity to advance their customer required funds on a daily basis, customers will also have to maintain more funds with FCMs when at the same time customers want to maintain less funds as a result of MF Global and Peregrine Financial Group. The FIA previously had proposed a compromise measure that would not require FCMs to set aside their own funds to cover deficits until late each day, viewing the prior day's activity. This past week, the FIA provided to the CFTC legal and economic arguments supporting this proposed compromise. Let's see where it goes, although it is very sad that for no one's real benefit and a suspect legal theory, the CFTC is proposing to change decades of their interpretation of the relevant law in the first place. And last but not least, we met with elected officials right before the House voted down the Farm Bill in a very surprise action. Given the paralysis on the Hill, it seems doubtful if the House and Senate will address reauthorization of the CFTC on a timely basis this year, when at the same time the Senate is likely to have to consider up to 3 nominees for CFTC Commissioner positions, including the chairman's position, as well as the agency's 2014 budget too. In other developments this week, the CFTC filed and settled charges against ABN Amro Clearing Chicago for failing to segregate or secure sufficient customer funds on 4 occasions from March 2009 through August 2011, for failing to meet minimum net capital requirements as of month-end April 2011, and for not being able to calculate and generate the correct margin for a very limited number of a certain type of accounts at some point prior to January 27, 2012. In response, ABN Amro paid a fine of USD 1 million and had to enlist the services of a third-party consultant to review and evaluate relevant policies and procedures. I have a summary of this action and some very practical lessons learned on my www site. Check it out. They may be helpful. Speaking of consultants, Last week, Deloitte LLP paid a USD 10 million fine and agreed for its financial advisory services unit not to enter into new business with certain New York State banks to settle accusations related to its review of money laundering controls at Standard Chartered Bank. You will recall that in August 2012, Standard Chartered settled with New York for USD 340 million, and in December with U.S. agencies for another USD 327 million related to breaking U.S. sanctions against Iran and other countries. New York had claimed Deloitte failed to include certain critical information in a report to regulators on its independent review of Standard Chartered, and as part of its work, gave Standard Chartered confidential reports involving suspicious activities the firm had prepared for other banks. This is quite a warning shot fired at consultants advising financial services firms generally. Check it out. Also on June 14, the London Stock Exchange announced it intended to launch an interest rate swaps trading platform, MTS Swaps, in the fourth quarter of this year. A couple of upcoming dates to keep in mind. On July 1st, a new CME advisory on wash trades goes into effect. I should have a summary of this new advice by June 24th on my www site. Likewise, on July 1st, as I reported previously, the NFA extends its new rules related to segregated and secured customer accounts to cleared swaps customer collateral accounts. Among other things, this will require FCMs to maintain written policy and procedures regarding the maintenance of its target residual interest in such cleared swap accounts, and have certain approval and notice requirements related to disbursements from such accounts exceeding 25% or more of such residual interest. Certain daily and bi-monthly reporting is also required. By July 19th, the NFA will require non-clearing FCMs to instruct all their clearing FCMs carrying their customer omnibus accounts to report end-of-day balances directly to the non-clearing FCM's designated self-regulatory organization. This is similar to the requirement that all FCMs now have to comply with in connection with their banks and trust companies holding customer segregated cash and security balances, the one that went into effect during February this year. And finally, we know what happens on July 12th, the outcome we dare not mention. It sounds somewhat like Lord Voldemort of Harry Potter fame. One international development worth mentioning too, this week the Monetary Authority of Singapore issued Technology Risk Management Notice and Guidelines, setting forth comprehensive legal requirements for financial industry companies. These requirements relate to, among other things, ensuring the reliability, availability, and recoverability of critical IT systems, and the protection of customer information. And finally, this past week, the FIA and FOA announced an agreement in principle to form an affiliation under a new umbrella, FIA Global. If only the CFTC would follow the same principle and recognize that going at it alone is not the best way to ensure the vibrancy of international financial markets. Keep in mind, you can find links to many of the matters I discussed today right below this video on my www site. Until next week, this is Gary DeWall, and this is Bridging the Week.